The cold October morning brought a sharp wind that cut through the streets of London like a knife. Guard Marcus Reed stood at his post outside Windsor Castle, his red uniform immaculate despite the harsh weather. At 26 years old, he had served in the Coldstream Guards for 4 years, and he knew how to endure discomfort without showing it. The early morning shift was always the quietest, with fewer tourists and a peaceful atmosphere that Marcus actually preferred. He could hear the distant sounds of the town waking up, delivery trucks rumbling down cobblestone streets, shop owners opening their doors, and the occasional early commuter. Hurrying past with a steaming cup of coffee, Marcus had grown up in a working-class family in Manchester. His father worked in a factory, and his mother cleaned offices at night to make ends meet. Joining the military had been his way of building a better life, of bringing honor to his family name. Every day he wore this uniform, he thought about how proud his parents were when they saw him march in ceremonies. The castle grounds were meticulously maintained, with perfectly trimmed hedges and flower beds that showcased the finest British gardening traditions. Even in October, the landscapers had managed to keep some flowers blooming, creating splashes of color against the gray stone walls of the ancient fortress. A jogger ran past, breathing heavily in the crisp morning air. She gave Marcus a quick wave, which he acknowledged only with his eyes, maintaining his stoic pose. These regular morning exercisers had become familiar faces over the months. Part of the routine rhythm of his duty, the sound of church bells chiming 7 o'clock echoed. Across the town, Marcus had been on duty for 3 hours already, but he felt alert and focused. His training had taught him to find a meditative calm in these long periods of standing watch. He thought of it as active meditation, remaining completely aware of his surroundings while maintaining perfect stillness. A delivery van pulled up to the service entrance, and workers began unloading fresh produce for the castle kitchens. Marcus watched from his peripheral vision as they went about their work with quiet efficiency. Everyone who worked on castle grounds understood the importance of maintaining dignity and professionalism at all times. 2 police officers on patrol walked through the area, their radio chatter a low murmur in the morning air. They nodded respectfully to Marcus as they passed. One of the small acknowledgments between security professionals that helped make the long shifts more bearable. The morning light was growing stronger now, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Marcus could see his breath in small puffs of vapor, but the cold didn't bother him. He had served in much harsher conditions during training exercises in Scotland, where freezing rain and fierce winds had tested every recruit's determination. A groundskeeper walked by with a wheelbarrow full of autumn leaves, the wheels creaking rhythmically on the uneven stones. The man had been working these grounds for over 20 years. Marcus had come to respect his quiet dedication to maintaining the castle's appearance. There was dignity in all honest work, his father had always told him. The first tour group of the day was beginning to form near the visitor center. Marcus could see the guide checking her watch and organizing her materials while early tourists gathered around her, cameras already in hand. Soon the peaceful morning quiet would give way to the bustle of curious visitors from around the world. A cat wandered across the courtyard, probably one of the many strays that found shelter in the nooks and crannies of the old castle walls. It paused to look at Marcus curiously before continuing on its way. Disappearing into a cluster of bushes near the gift shop, Marcus thought about his younger sister Sarah, who was studying to become a teacher. She often joked that his job was like being a very well-dressed scarecrow, but he knew she understood the real importance of what he did. The Queen's Guard represented something larger than themselves: tradition, stability, and continuity in a rapidly changing world. The morning routine was predictable and comforting in its familiarity. Marcus knew that in about an hour the tourist crowds would arrive in earnest, bringing with them the usual mix of genuine curiosity, silly attempts to make him react, and respectful admiration for the traditions he represented. What he didn't know was that this particular morning would bring an encounter that would test everything he believed about duty, compassion, and what it truly meant to serve his country and fellow citizens. As the morning progressed, the first wave of tourists began to arrive at Windsor Castle. Marcus watched as families with excited children, elderly couples with guidebooks, groups of international visitors started gathering in the courtyard. The The peaceful quiet of early morning was gradually replaced by the familiar sounds of tourism, multiple languages mixing together, the click of cameras, and the animated chatter of people exploring one of Britain's most historic sites, a school. A group from Germany approached Marcus's position, a teacher explaining in accented English about the role of the Queen's Guard. The children, it's probably around 12 years old, stared at him with wide-eyed fascination. One brave boy stepped forward and asked in careful English if Marcus ever got tired of standing so still. Marcus remained motionless. But he appreciated the boy's polite curiosity. The October sun was climbing higher now, providing some warmth. Despite the crisp autumn air, Marcus could see leaves swirling across the courtyard, creating small whirlwinds that danced around the feet of tourists before settling against the ancient stone walls. The changing seasons always reminded him of the passage of time and the continuity of traditions that stretched back centuries. A professional photographer was setting up equipment nearby, preparing for what looked like a wedding photo shoot. The bride and groom would probably arrive soon to have their pictures taken with the castle as a backdrop. Marcus had witnessed hundreds of these sessions over the years, each couple wanting to capture their special day against the grandeur of royal history. Two maintenance workers approached with painting supplies, preparing to touch up some railings that had been weathered by the previous week's storms. They worked quietly and efficiently, understanding the need to maintain the castle's pristine appearance while disturbing the tourist experience as little as possible. Marcus noticed a security guard in plain clothes walking casually through the crowd, his trained eyes scanning for anything unusual. The security team was always present but tried to remain invisible, allowing visitors to enjoy their experience while ensuring everyone's safety. It was a delicate balance that required skill and professionalism. A group of American tourists gathered. Nearby, their guide explaining the history of Windsor Castle and its significance to the British royal family. Marcus could hear snippets of their conversation as they discussed the castle's role during World War II and its continued importance as a royal residence. He always found it interesting to hear how visitors from other countries perceived British traditions. The morning shift change was still 2 hours away, but Marcus felt strong and alert. His physical training had prepared him for these long periods of standing, and his mental discipline helped him maintain focus even as the activity around him increased. He thought of his fellow guardsmen who were stationed at other royal locations around the country, all of them maintaining the same standards of excellence. A delivery truck pulled up near the gift shop, and workers began unloading boxes of souvenirs and postcards. The commercial side of tourism was always present at these historic sites, helping to fund the preservation and maintenance of Britain's cultural heritage. Marcus understood that tourism played an important role in keeping these traditions alive and accessible to future generations. The sound of bagpipes could be heard in the distance. Probably a street performer, entertaining crowds in the town center. The haunting melody drifted across the castle grounds, adding an atmospheric quality to the morning. Music had always been an important part of military tradition, and Marcus appreciated the way it could evoke emotions and memories. A young couple approached cautiously, clearly tourists who seemed nervous about taking pictures near Marcus. The woman kept giggling and whispering to her boyfriend, while he encouraged her to pose naturally. Finally, she stood next to Marcus for a quick photo, her smile bright with excitement at being so close to a real Queen's Guard. As they walked away, Marcus heard her say to her boyfriend, "I can't believe how perfectly still he stands. It must take incredible training and discipline." Her words reminded him why he took such pride in his duty. He was representing something much larger than himself, embodying values of service and dedication that people from around the world came to witness and admire. The morning continued, with its steady rhythm of tourists, guided tours, and the general bustle of a popular historic attraction. Marcus remained focused and alert, unaware that an encounter was approaching that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his role as a protector and servant of the people. Around mid-morning, Marcus noticed a figure approaching from the direction of the town center. Unlike the typical tourists who moved in groups with cameras and guidebooks, this person walked alone with a distinctly different manner. As the figure came closer, Marcus could see it was a man in his 50s, wearing layers of worn clothing that suggested he might be living rough. The man's appearance was disheveled, but not dirty. His beard was gray and unkempt, and his clothes a faded military. Surplus jacket over several sweaters had clearly seen better days. What struck Marcus most was the man's posture and bearing. Despite his obvious circumstances, he walked with the straight spine and measured gait of someone with military training. Tourist groups were still moving through the courtyard, but several people began to notice the homeless man's approach toward the guard post. Some tourists stepped aside nervously, while others began reaching for their phones, sensing that something interesting might be about to happen. The atmosphere shifted subtly from casual tourism to focused attention. The man stopped, about 15 feet away from Marcus, and simply stood there, studying the young guard with intelligent brown eyes. There was something in his gaze that reminded Marcus of his drill instructors, a look of assessment and understanding that suggested this stranger knew exactly what Marcus's duties entailed, and what kind of training he had undergone. Security. Personnel began moving closer, their casual positions shifting to more alert stances. The homeless man's presence wasn't threatening, but it was unusual enough to warrant increased attention. Marcus could sense the security team's readiness without seeing them directly, aware that they were prepared to intervene if necessary. The man reached into his jacket pocket, causing several tourists to step back and the security team to tense visibly. But what he pulled out was not a weapon or anything threatening. It was a small, worn notebook and a pencil stub. He opened the notebook and appeared to be writing something. Glancing up at Marcus occasionally as if taking notes, a group of teenage tourists began whispering among themselves, pointing at the homeless man and speculating about what he might be doing. Their voices carried in the crisp air, mixing curiosity with a hint of nervous excitement. Some raised their phones to record whatever might happen next. The man finished writing and tore a page from his notebook. He folded it carefully and held it in his hand as he took several steps closer to Marcus. The security team moved into more obvious positions now, ready to act if the situation escalated. The tourist chatter gradually faded as more people noticed the unfolding drama. When he was about 6 feet away, the homeless man stopped again and looked directly at Marcus's face. His expression was serious, but not angry or threatening. There was something almost respectful in his manner, as if he understood the significance of what Marcus represented, and didn't want to compromise his position unnecessarily. The man's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the crisp diction of someone who had once held authority. Despite his appearance, his words were clear and articulate. "Guard," he said formally, "I have something I need to tell you, and I believe it's important that you hear it." The crowd around them had grown larger now, with tourists stopping their sightseeing to witness this unusual confrontation between a homeless man and one of Britain's elite guards. Cameras were raised, phones were recording, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly, but his training held firm. He remained perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead, even as every instinct told him to pay attention to what this man was saying. There was something in the stranger's bearing and manner of speaking that suggested this wasn't going to be a typical attempt to get a reaction from the stoic guard. The homeless man took another step closer, now well within the informal boundary that most tourists respected around the guard posts. Security personnel tensed further, hands moving closer to radios and equipment. The moment was balanced on a knife's edge, between routine tourist interaction and something that might require intervention. The folded paper in the man's hand seemed to represent some crucial message, something he felt compelled to deliver despite the obvious risks and potential consequences. Whatever he wanted to communicate. It was important enough to approach one of the most disciplined and unresponsive figures in British ceremonial life. The homeless man's next words cut through the morning air with unexpected authority. "I served with the Coldstream Guards for 12 years, he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Afghanistan, Iraq, and Bosnia." Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, service number 25,087,439. The declaration sent a ripple of shock through the gathered crowd. Tourists who had been expecting some kind of confrontation or plea for money instead found themselves witnessing something entirely different. The man's military bearing suddenly made perfect sense, and several people lowered their phones, sensing they were intruding on something deeply personal. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The Coldstream Guards' own regiment. Service number format was correct. The campaigns mentioned were real, and the way the man had stated his rank and details carried the unmistakable ring of authenticity. This wasn't some stranger trying to cause a disturbance. This was potentially a brother-in-arms who had fallen on hard times. Staff Sergeant Mitchell took another step closer, now standing directly in front of Marcus. The security team remained alert, but seemed to recognize that this wasn't a threat. It was something far more complex and emotionally charged. The man's eyes met Marcus's directly, veteran to veteran, despite the younger guard's obligation to remain motionless. I know. You can't respond while on duty, Mitchell continued, his voice softer now, but still carrying to the surrounding crowd. I know the protocols, the discipline, the pride that uniform represents. I wore it with honor for over a decade, and I see that same honor in how you stand here today. The folded paper in Mitchell's hand trembled slightly, revealing the emotion he was trying to control. The morning air felt charged with tension as dozens of tourists and several security personnel watched this unprecedented encounter unfold. Many in the crowd were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than a typical tourist interaction. Mitchell's voice grew stronger as he continued. 3 years ago, I was sleeping rough near Buckingham Palace when a young guardsman like yourself saw me during his off-duty hours. Instead of walking past like everyone else does, he stopped. He didn't have much money, but he bought me a meal and sat with me while I ate it. The crowd had grown completely silent now. Even the usual background noise of tourism seemed muted as people strained to hear every word of this unexpected testimony. Several tourists were visibly moved, some wiping tears from their eyes as they began to understand the true nature of what was happening. That young man didn't know my history, Mitchell went on. He didn't know I had served, didn't know I had medals locked away in a storage unit I could no longer afford to maintain. He just saw a human being who needed help, and he helped me. Questions, no judgment, just compassion from one person to another. Marcus's chest tightened with emotion. He wanted desperately to respond, to acknowledge this man's service and sacrifice, but his duty bound him to silence. The internal struggle between his military discipline and his human empathy created a tension that was almost unbearable. Mitchell reached out and carefully placed the folded paper at the base of Marcus's post, ensuring it wouldn't blow away in the autumn breeze. That act of kindness changed my life, he said quietly. It reminded me that I still had value as a human being, that my service had meant something, and that there were still people who cared about their fellow citizens. The homeless veteran stepped back slightly, maintaining the respectful distance that military protocol demanded. His eyes never left Marcus's face, and there was something in his expression that suggested he was seeing not just this individual guard, but remembering his own years of service, his own pride in wearing the same uniform. I got help after that, Mitchell continued, his voice now carrying to every person in the increasingly large crowd. I found housing, got treatment for my problems, reconnected with some of my family. I'm not saying I'm completely back on my feet, that's a long process, but I'm alive today because one of your brothers in arms remembered that serving your country means serving all of its people, not just the ones who live in castles. The impact of his words was visible throughout the crowd. Many tourists were openly crying now, and even some of the security personnel seemed affected by this unexpected display of gratitude and human connection. Mitchell's voice grew even more emotional as he continued his tribute. I come here every few months, whenever I can manage the train fare, to stand near guards like you and remember what it felt like to serve with honor. Today, I wanted to do more than just remember. I wanted to say thank you. The crowd around them had swelled to nearly 50 people, all completely silent and focused on this extraordinary moment. Word was spreading through the castle grounds that something remarkable was happening, and more tourists and even some castle staff were quietly approaching to witness the scene. The young guardsman who helped me that night probably doesn't even remember it, Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. It was just one small act of kindness among hundreds of duties and responsibilities. But for me, it was everything. It was the difference between giving up completely and finding the strength to keep fighting. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes, but his training held firm. Couldn't wipe them away, couldn't move, couldn't even blink more than necessary. The internal battle between his emotions and his duty was creating a tension that was almost overwhelming. Every fiber of his being wanted to embrace this man, to tell him that his service had been appreciated, that he deserved better than homelessness and hardship. Mitchell reached into another pocket and pulled out something that made several people in the crowd gasp audibly. It was a military medal, tarnished and worn, but unmistakably genuine. "This is my Afghanistan service medal," he said, holding it up so Marcus and the crowd could see it clearly. "I kept it when I had to sell almost everything else, because it represented the best part of who I used to be." The veteran looked at the medal for a long moment before continuing. "I realize now that the best part of who I am isn't in the past. It's in what I choose to do with whatever time I have left. And what I choose to do is make sure people like you know that your service matters, not just to the royal family or to the country in some abstract way, but to real people who need to be reminded that honor and compassion still exist in this world." An elderly woman in the crowd stepped forward slightly and began to applaud slowly. Within seconds, the entire gathering joined her, creating a wave of respectful applause that echoed off the castle walls. It wasn't the kind of excited clapping that sometimes accompanied tourist photos, but something deeper and more reverent, a recognition of both Mitchell's courage in speaking out and Marcus's discipline in maintaining his post while clearly being deeply affected by the words. Mitchell waited for the applause to fade before speaking again. "I know you can't respond to me right now, and I respect that. It's the discipline you're showing right now, staying focused on your duty even while hearing this. That's exactly the kind of strength that makes the Guard what it is. But I hope you'll read what I've written down when your shift ends." The folded paper at Marcus's feet seemed to glow with significance. Whatever message Mitchell had written, it clearly represented something important, perhaps contact information, perhaps just a more detailed thank you, or perhaps something even more meaningful. Mitchell straightened to attention, his military bearing returning fully as he prepared to leave. Despite his worn clothing and weathered appearance, he looked every inch the professional soldier he had once been. The transformation was striking and moved many in the crowd to fresh tears. "Guards of the Coldstream Regiment," Mitchell said, in a voice that carried the authority of his former rank, "you represent the best of British military tradition. You stand watch over our history, our values, and our future. But more than that, you represent the possibility that ordinary people can choose to live extraordinary lives of service and sacrifice." The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath, sensing that this remarkable encounter was approaching its conclusion. Mitchell's words had transformed what began as curiosity about an unusual confrontation into something much deeper. A reminder of the human cost of service and the power of simple kindness to change lives. Mitchell took one step back and rendered a perfect military salute to Marcus, holding it for several seconds with the precision and respect that only comes from years of military training. The gesture was so unexpected and moving that several people in the crowd began crying again, overwhelmed by the dignity and emotion of the moment. As Mitchell held his salute, something unprecedented happened. A single tear rolled down Marcus's cheek, visible to everyone in the crowd, despite his efforts to maintain perfect composure. The young guard's emotional response to the veterans' tribute created a moment of such raw humanity that the entire gathering seemed to understand they were witnessing something that would stay with them forever. Mitchell lowered his salute and nodded respectfully. "Thank you for your service, Guardsmen. Thank you for representing all of us who have worn that uniform with such dignity." He turned to leave, walking away with the same measured military stride he had used when approaching. The crowd remained silent for several more moments, as if afraid that speaking might somehow diminish what they had just witnessed. Then, spontaneously, the applause began again, not for entertainment, but as a tribute to both men and what they represented about duty, service, and human compassion. Marcus remained at his post, a single tear still visible on his cheek, the folded paper at his feet a tangible reminder of the encounter. His commanding officer, Captain Harrison, had been watching from a distance and now approached quietly. Instead of reprimanding Marcus for his emotional display, the captain simply nodded with understanding. Sometimes Captain Harrison said, quietly, so only Marcus could hear, "The most difficult part of our duty isn't standing still or remaining silent. It's maintaining our humanity while doing so. You've done both today, and you've done them with honor." When Marcus's shift ended 2 hours later, he carefully picked up Mitchell's note with trembling hands. Inside, written in neat handwriting, it was a simple message. "Thank you for reminding me every day that honor still exists in this world. Your service matters more than you know. If you ever want to talk to an old soldier who understands, I have coffee at the shelter on Elm Street. Every Tuesday morning, Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, Coldstream Guards, retired."
Ow.
Below the message was a phone number and the address of a Veterans Support Center, where
Ow.
Mitchell apparently volunteered. Marcus kept that note in his uniform pocket for the remainder of his service with the Guard. 6 months later, he began visiting the Veterans Center during his off-duty hours, helping younger soldiers transition back to civilian life and ensuring that no veteran felt forgotten or abandoned. The video footage of Mitchell's tribute, recorded by dozens of tourists, spread across social media within hours. But instead of becoming just another viral moment, it sparked a genuine conversation about how society treats its veterans and the importance of recognizing service in all its forms. The encounter led to increased support for homeless in the Windsor area, with several local businesses offering job opportunities and housing assistance. Mitchell himself became an advocate for veterans services, using his story to help others understand that homelessness can affect anyone, including those who have served their country with distinction. Marcus and Mitchell did meet for coffee that following Tuesday, beginning a friendship that would last for years. The young guard learned about Mitchell's struggles with PTSD, the challenges of transitioning to civilian life, and the long journey back from homelessness. In return, Marcus shared his own hopes and fears about military service and his commitment to honoring the traditions of the Guard. The story became legendary within the Coldstream Guards, used as an example during training of how their service extended beyond protecting royal properties to representing the values that make service meaningful. It reminded every new recruit that the uniform they wore connected them to a brotherhood of service that transcended rank, age, and circumstances. Years later, when Marcus had completed his service with the Guard and moved on to other endeavors, he would still visit Mitchell at the Veterans Center. The two men, bound together by that extraordinary moment at Windsor Castle, continued to support each other and other veterans in their community. The folded paper that Mitchell had placed at Marcus's feet was eventually framed and displayed in the Veterans Center, with a small plaque explaining its significance. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most important messages are delivered not through grand gestures, but through simple acts of recognition, respect, and human connection between people who understand the true meaning of service